Hello and welcome to today's episode of Date in a Blink, where we're joined by online dating expert Coach T. Anthony.
Modern dating sucks, but it doesn't have to. Here on the Date in a Blink podcast, you'll listen in on 10-minute voice-only speed dates between strangers. The experience is designed to move people beyond mindless swiping and marathon messaging. Our position on online dating? It's time to stop collecting pen pals and start, going on actual dates.
Online dating? That actually involves dating? Is that even a thing anymore? But for real, dating should be fun. We hope listening in inspires y'all to try new ways of meeting people. Tune in every other week to hear a new couple go on a date. In between, we'll talk to relationship experts about how the date went and what we can learn from it.
Will our handpicked podcast matches find love on these Blink dates? Or will they say goodbye to each other after 10 minutes and never look back? Tune in to find out.
Before we jump into today's episode, here's a quick word from our sponsors.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain a bit. It's totally free, and Anchor will distribute the podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and lots of other podcasting platforms. Not only that, but it has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. It also lets you make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make your podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
For today's episode of Date in a Blink, we'll be chatting with Coach T. Anthony, an online dating expert with over 15 years of experience and a background in behavioral science and behavioral analysis interviewing. Coach T is the author of the book, The Art of Online Seduction, a frequent podcast guest, and an active voice on social media. He's committed to ensuring that his clients find success in the often chaotic world of online dating and ultimately hopes to change his clients' relationship status from Netflix Oreos and sweatpants to I'm taken. Coach T, it's a pleasure to finally chat with you.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be here. This should be fun.
So let's go ahead and jump right in, shall we?
Let's do it.
So on a podcast episode with fellow dating coach Jennifer Hurwitz, you emphasize the importance of having a stellar profile, one that includes professional photos and all. Since Blink sets people up on blind voice dates, it removes all of that. So what are your thoughts on blind dating in the online frontier?
I love it. I mean, anything that's going to spice things up, I'm all about. So, everyone can have a curated profile. That's fine. But, it all comes down to what is your life like? Do you have a curated life to speak about? Or do you have a purpose and a passion in life? Do you have hobbies? What keeps you busy? All this stuff still needs to be communicated articulately on any date, whether it's a blind date or a date in person. So, I think the curated profile these days is a little overrated.
That might actually answer some of my question. What are some ways to put your best foot forward when you don't have a curated profile to lean on?
Well, just make sure that you can speak articulately about your life, right? Mm-hmm. Because we spend so much, as an online dating coach, I spend so much time getting all the information out of them and putting it on a profile, right? But that's great. If it's on a profile, then you can, it's obviously real and it's obviously what you're living day by day. So you just need to be able to speak about it. Make sure that you have, some questions that you want to ask people, or make sure that, you understand what people might be asking you, right? And, it's one of those things where, what is interesting about you? You got to ask that question and then be able to answer it.
It's a funny question to ask because in many ways, a lot of us are so shy and don't like sharing or bragging about ourselves. It might feel like, or just opening up, it can be really hard. And so kind of an impromptu follow-up question. How would you recommend people kind of prepare themselves to put themselves out there in that way?
Preparation. I have all my clients make sure that they have questions on the go, from the hip, ready to rock and roll, which absolutely helps the shyness, because the one thing that nobody likes is that awkward silence, right? and the awkward silence, I think, happens because both parties can be a little nervous, and you might not be as prepared as you should be, right? Okay. the awkward silences are going to happen. That's when you whip out these, curated questions or prepared, canned questions that you can start a conversation with. And you always want to make sure it's an open-ended type question and not a yes or no question, right? Like the one that I love is what keeps you busy, right? And not, where they're going to be able to say yes or no. They have to now explain. And then that gets you into a different conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm imagining someone asking that question and someone going, yes.
I'm sure it's happened.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's happened.
Yep, it absolutely has. If there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
Yeah. I also love that you preemptively answered one of the questions I had, which was, I was going to ask you what's one of your favorite questions to ask someone or just, whip out at a party kind of a thing. So I love that you preemptively answered that. Kind of in the absence of photos and thinking about the date specifically with Samantha and Austin, was there anything in their conversation that made you think that probably made for a really good first impression?
I absolutely love this date. I almost felt dirty. I felt like I was sitting next to them in a cafe and listening in on their date, and it was just such a fun date. I mean, I think both of them made a good first impression by not falling into the trap of doing a job interview style date. I think they both went back and forth, and neither one of them stepped on the other by talking too much or things like that. Of course, you have to ask questions while you're on a date, but they did it in such a really good flow, right? It didn't feel like it was canned. It didn't feel like you stepped into a job interview for the accounting position. So I think both of them had a good first impression by just being genuinely interested in getting to know one another.
Love that. That's one of my favorite things when listening to dates, when I hear that the folks are actually listening to what the other person is saying and asking questions about it or following up, or even, we host dates where folks will, be 3 minutes away from a topic that they raised. And then they'll say, oh, actually, you mentioned this earlier. And it shows that they're really listening and engaged with the other person. So I love that. And I agree. We definitely had that in this date. And I have another question for you. Mm-hmm. So online dating is your area of expertise. But like anything else, online dating has its challenges. What are some aspects of the dating process that you would say are complicated by online dating? And how do you think people can try to overcome those complications?
I think a lot of people fall into the trap of seeing it as a buffet style dating apparatus, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So they feel as if they're not going to be able to find someone because there's always going to be someone, better on the other side or more things to choose from the buffet, right? And that's always going to happen. I like online dating because of one thing is that when you walk into a bar or an event or a venue and you find someone attractive, the first thing that comes to your mind isn't, am I going to get rejected? It's, are they single? Are they married? Are they even available? Would they even like me, right? Online dating now eliminates all that for the most part, unless they're lying, right? Yeah. But you don't have to worry about whether or not they're single or married or whatever. For the most part, again, it can happen. But that kind of is what I like about online dating. You already are in a pool of people that are like-minded and are single and, hopefully looking for the same thing. And obviously people can look for serious and some people can look for casual, but you can definitely filter those out. So that's kind of my take on the whole thing, the good and the bad.
Yeah. Well, when you're talking about this, it reminds me of this concept. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. It's kind of the paradox of choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We get trapped in that. We get trapped in that because back in the day when you got hooked up with a friend of a friend or a family member, there was no online dating. You took more time to get to know them because there was no there was no such thing as a paradox of choice.
Yeah.
There was, oh my gosh, I get to meet someone new and go out with them. And you spent weeks, maybe months hanging out and dating, where online dating, it's like, after 3 conversations, I do have more choice. So let me just get rid of that person it's almost like a tumbleweed where I could do better, I could do better, I could do better. And a lot of people do fall into that trap, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's a really a great point to bring up. And I'm curious if we dig in a little bit further on that. So yeah, back in the day, quote unquote, whenever that was, people were spending more time actually going through the dating and the courting process to get to know somebody before really making those decisions. And also the pools around them were much smaller because you're generally only dating within your town at that point. So I'm curious, in your experience, and as you've seen online dating evolve, do you think that that's a benefit, or do you think that that's a detriment to online daters today, or somewhere in between?
Which part is a detriment?
Essentially not taking additional time to get to know people, not necessarily the paradox of choice. Well, I guess, yeah, it's a mixture of the paradox of choice coupled with not really taking the time. The second that something happens, you're like, up, on to the next.
Well, I like progress. No matter what area of life we're in, online dating, I see more progress than I see more pros than cons. So yes, it could possibly be a detriment, but we all have to adjust to progress, right? So yes, we're going to vet people a little bit more slowly and quickly at the same time, if that makes any sense. Yeah. But when it comes to online dating and dating back in the day, online dating, we're just basically throwing out maybe three things that this person needs to have in order to keep continuing to talk to them, or releasing them into the wild so they could talk to somebody else. Where, back in the day, it's kind of, okay, let's see if this molds. Let's see if this changes, once we get to know each other, right? Maybe, this thing that I wanted isn't so important because he or she's got so many other different qualities. That just isn't happening in online dating. We basically have, okay, are you this, do you want to get married? Do you want to have kids? You have your things, your list that you want to go through, and, and if they don't pass it, then you're on to the next one. And sometimes we can get caught up in just eliminating people without actually getting to know them. And are we really ranking our list of non-negotiables on a scale 1 to 10? I always tell my clients, like, hey, if you want this, this, and that on a scale 1 to 10, where is it? If it's a 10, then scream it from the rooftops, stick to it. But if it's really not a 10, then you need to understand that. So maybe you can get to know somebody a little bit better on a longer time frame, because maybe you both can compromise on something, right?
Right. So that is one very common mistake. I agree. I'm curious if there are other common mistakes you see when it comes to online dating, and any advice you might have for steering clear of those mistakes.
I think the number one thing that has creeped up in the last year is negativity. I mean, someone could have the best photos and the absolute best curated profile, but, at the end it says basically, hey, if you are a Trumpster, swipe left, or if you like Joe Biden, you're an idiot, swipe left. And they just basically burn their entire bridge with anybody, because two things when it comes to negativity, especially like when you're utilizing politics, is that one, the person for you is going to look at that and go, well, I'm liberal, you're liberal, but you're a hateful liberal. I don't want that in my life, right? Because there are ways to say that online. You could say, hey, I lean to the left, hope you do too. There's ways to do it, but I'd say 90% of people who speak of politics, it's always in a negative way. And it's like, I don't even want to come close to someone who thinks a different way than me, right? So the person for them is sitting there going, okay, that's not for me at all. If they would have said it in a different tone, maybe. And then the second thing is that now all you're doing is attracting another toxic, hateful person that believes in your politics. And now you're going to absolutely that's the compatibility you're going to have when you're dating. When you go on that date, you're going to talk about politics for 30 to 60 minutes. and all the other compatibles are out the door because you both are in this toxic cycle of hate for the other side. And that's one of the biggest things I see within the last year creeping up in online dating.
Question for you, because, piggybacking off the conversation about folks and how they think about negotiables and non-negotiables, and if it's a 10 or a 2, if some of these things are 10s, but, it can create this negative perception of others, how would you recommend folks filter for that while not necessarily, entering the dating world with that negative mindset about, the whole subsection of people that might not meet that non-negotiable for them?
Well, I think dating is all about balance, right? So I always tell my clients, look, I don't want you going into a date or even a conversation or a video chat or anything with a list of non-negotiables that you need to just weed out, or get from this person, right? But what I do want you to do is, if you do go on a date, have one non-negotiable question available, because your goal is to make sure that you're having fun, you're connecting with the person, and and that also includes maybe throwing out one non-negotiable. Hey, by the way, nice strike on it. Maybe you guys are bowling. Hey, nice strike. Hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Do you see yourself married? Do you see yourself having some kids? And if that's important to you, you really need to get some of these questions out of the way without it being too negative and too overbearing, right? But you also still want to have the pleasure of dating someone and meeting someone new. So I always suggest them to ask that, because if he or she says, oh, I see myself traveling Thailand for the next 10 years and really just living off my laptop and blah, blah, blah. If you want, to build a household, to have children, and to get married, that person's not for you. But
Right.
It doesn't mean you can't connect with them and have a good time and date, because dating is practice, and the more you date, the more you learn.
I like that mindset. Thinking about it as, let's just go and have a fun time. And in the process, we'll explore whether or not there's something in the future for us. But you don't need to put the future before having fun if you're just on a first date. Like, I really do appreciate that mindset.
Yeah. It also reminds me of a phrase that always sticks with me, that people come into your life for a reason, a season, and for life. And it's important to know the difference between those three.
Yes, absolutely. I can't tell you how many clients have done this thing, this exact thing I just spoke of. And at the end of the date or through a text or whatever, they say, hey, I don't think we're going to be on the same page as what we want. And the other person agrees, and they're like, but you know what? I got a guy, his name is Mark. He's a good buddy of mine. He wants exactly what I think you two would be great. Right. So dating can not just be fun, but it can also be great opportunity to make other connections.
So true.
Yeah. That's one of those things that I find really heartwarming in the dating space, is that, and I think we're actually getting a little bit away from this. I think people, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. One thing I've noticed, at least in my social circles and being in the dating and relationship space, is people tend to be a bit more personal about their love lives, and they're not as open about sharing it with other people, especially if they're having a hard time with it. And so one thing that I've found is that it seems like people aren't really sharing what their experience is like. And so sometimes you might have someone that you meet and you might think to yourself, oh, you know what? I think this person would be a great connection for this other person in my life. And I find that people, I don't think, are as quick to make that type of an introduction as they might have been, maybe 10-ish or so years ago. And I'm curious if I don't know if that's a trend that you've seen or not, or if that's, just my weird social circles.
Well, I think the trend is when you go into a date, making sure that the person is for you, going through your checklist and all that. And that's all you're worried about, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not even worried about if we are connecting, if we have fun together, and any of that. So if you're not doing that, how would you ever, be grounded enough to say, oh, you know what? Although this probably isn't my person, Sally is I think would have a great time with this guy, and yada, yada, yada. So I think that's so important, why I tell my clients, fun first. Do not go in with your list. Leave the list at home, right? And just get to know them on a nice level. Because if it's so, if you go in and it's just such a cringe feel where you're just always on broken glass, and you're trying to just make sure you say the right thing instead of just being authentic and being yourself and just hanging it all out, because I just want to connect. And if they don't like me for who I am, then that's fine. But I'm going out to have fun. I'm not going out there to try and be that perfect person for someone.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love how many tips you've shared with us already on, and some takeaways for people on how they can improve their dating life. But I'm curious, what were some takeaways from Samantha and Austin's date in particular that you feel might be helpful to other blind daters?
Being genuine, showing genuine interest, which those both did. And I know they both had questions for each other, but they flowed nicely. So just kind of being more relaxed and just trying to get to know them, and maybe poke a little fun and ask questions. I like the tortoise, and what are you going to name it? And there are so many fun little things within that date that isn't going to happen if you stick to a script. So do not go by a script. Just kind of let it flow, and if you're genuinely interested, you're going to end up asking good questions. The problem is when you're already trying to force canned questions in. It's going to throw you off, and it's not going to make for a very comfortable date.
For Samantha and Austin, if they did match and decided they wanted to meet up for an in-person date, what advice would you give them?
I think continue on the same plan that they've been doing. If they had a great first 10-minute date, I think it should continue in that same realm. I would say, hey, you already had a date where you guys were talking, so let's find a first date where you guys can have some actual fun. Maybe a little competition, some pool, billiards, darts, bowling, whatever it is that you both enjoy, and see how you guys react together in a competitive type environment. Because every time you want to go on a date, I don't care if it's a video date, a blind date like this, you always want to up the game. You always want to do something different and move and progress in your dating, right? So you don't want to go from a blind date like this to a coffee date, because this was the coffee date, right? Skip it. Let's get to having some fun, right? Maybe go and race some cars around if you got one of those places, or an adult fun arcade where you can have some drinks and also play some Pop-A-Shot.
Right.
You always got to up it. You always got to keep moving forward and make it even better and better each and every date.
I'm trying to think if I've ever gone on a date at a bowling alley or like doing darts or billiards, and I don't think I have.
Whoa, that was my third date with my current partner that I've been with, and it was how we knew we were meant for each other. So, Coach T, I love that you suggested that. I think what you were saying before, it can bring out your competitive spirit, and you can get to know whether you and the other person can actually play these kinds of games together. And also, I think it tells a lot about someone. Are they a sore loser? Do they let you win sometimes? Are they fun to play with? And I think it's really indicative of someone's overall personality in a way that you otherwise wouldn't get to know, other than the traditional, how do they treat the wait staff kind of a thing. I feel like you really get to know how someone is when you see them in that competitive environment.
Right. Absolutely. Totally recommend.
I'm going to have to add that into my date mix.
Yes. Speaking of being in relationships, and something that we're talking about right now a little bit is how you can make the most fun of the relationship. So many of us know just how much fun the honeymoon stage of a relationship can be, but we also know that it doesn't last forever. So what are some pointers you have for daters when it comes to keeping that spark alive?
Well, I love the spark question. It's one of my favorites, because a lot of times we don't have that spark, right? And the time we do have it, it's just so overwhelming. It's not a spark, it's like a lightning bolt. And a lot of times what happens is that, we're both on cloud nine, and we're talking and we're chatting, we're texting all day, all night for days, if not weeks on end. And one of us is going to the point and saying, oh my God, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, because I have a life to get back to, right? But the spark is so rich and it's so there. So once you feel that spark, you really need to slow things down. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a client say, yeah, I had the spark And the next date that they had after that first date was the very next day. You're going to burn out this fire, and it's going to be it's going to be a catastrophe because you're not going to have anything left to say, left to do, and left to explore, because you have pushed everything in such a small area of time. So if you feel that, go into the restroom, splash your face with some cold water, and slow it down, because that's what you're going to need. You're going to have a little cold water on the face wake up call to say, okay, this is fantastic. Let's make sure we spread it out. Let's make sure that you say, hey, I have a life, and let's text a couple times a week or what have you. And that's how you keep the spark alive, by setting those types of standards in the beginning and not allowing the emotions to take over and cloud your judgment into allowing it to burn out by spending way too much time, whether it's together, online, texting, or so forth.
So now the $1 million question, date in a blink, what did you think? Do you think that they matched, Coach T?
I do. I mean, I don't see, I mean, for a blind date, that was as good as it gets.
I also thought that they would match. And I will flip it over to Laura, who is the host for the date, to reveal whether or not they actually did.
Your drum roll, please.
Da, 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 da.
They matched.
Yes.
Yes, I know. It's very exciting. Both of them were having such a good time that after the date, they both said that they felt it was too short and they wanted to keep the conversation going.
I felt the same way.
I know.
I wanted to hear more.
I know. I felt so bad when I interrupted their date. I was like, oh man, I wish that the 10 minutes didn't fly by as quickly as they do, especially the first couple of minutes. People are kind of easing into it, getting to know each other. And then really, I think between minute 4 and 5 is where people really, that's where you can tell. You're like, yeah, this is going somewhere, or okay, we're probably going to end the date soon.
Yeah, no doubt. That is absolutely true. I was in it to win it. I was rooting for both of them. After about 4 or 5 minutes, I was just like, this is great.
Right. We're definitely excited to see and continue to hear how their relationship evolves, and same with other people that have gone through the podcast. So as we wrap up, a question we love to ask all of our experts: do you have any words of wisdom or advice for our audience?
Yeah, I'll give you my motto. And this is for online dating, speed dating, blind dating, whatever. Online dating isn't the thing. Dating, going on a blind date. How about this? Going on a blind date isn't the thing. It's the thing that gets us to the thing. And that's a great relationship.
I love that. Thank you so much for that advice. And thank you so much for joining us today. As our final question, how can our audience get connected with you?
Everyone can always find me in my Hangout, and it's called Instagram. You can find me at the Date Coach. Slide into my DMs. Try not to trip and fall. I'm always here to help.
We slid into your DM, so we are very happy we didn't trip and fall and that we're here today. So thank you.
Absolutely. Always fun to be with you guys.
That's all we've got for you today. Shoot us a message on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at The Blink Date or at Date in a Blink to let us know what you think. If you want to try voice-first speed dating from the comfort of your home, download the Blink Date app today. You can also sign up to participate in Date in a Blink by visiting our website at www.theblinkdate.com. In the meantime, thanks for joining us for this episode. We hope you enjoyed listening and look forward to talking with you again next time.